This is my dinner with Gabe. I'm here with Paul Finger. And we're going to be discussing James Bond's new film.
James Bond's latest film.
Called Skyfall.
As well as Argo's latest film. The Argo Cornstarch Indian Woman.
Jimmy Carter's latest production. We're going to talk about Argo, and we're going to talk about Skyfall. Skyfall is the new James Bond film, and Argo is the new Ben Affleck film. They're both spy thrillers, and they're kind of sort of about, I don't know, maybe, well, I would say, I guess Argo is sort of towards the end of the Cold War, or mid-Cold War. I don't know what part of the Cold War would that be.
It would have been the second, the Roger Moore era of James Bond.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, we were in Roger Moore time.
Speaking.
Yeah, historically speaking, Roger Moore, Grace Jones, Jaws. And the reason I played those two clips, the old James Bond theme with the Adele version of Skyfall theme, was just kind of, I feel like that's sort of how the whole movie felt. Was this sort of taking an old theme of James Bond and trying to figure out how to put it into the modern cultural context. I feel like that was sort of underneath the film a little bit, but I did a bad job of mixing.
It was terrible, actually.
It was horrible.
I ripped my eardrums. I can't hear anything you're saying. I'm watching your lips move.
Are you too loud? Do you want me to turn you down? Or
I think you're really too loud, man. I think I can always be louder.
Okay.
I think I'm pretty good.
Yeah, okay.
I think I don't think about both even.
No, I'm saying, is your earphones too loud? Perfect. Is it hurting your ears?
Perfect.
Okay. So we'll do a short show because Paul just walked in 45 minutes after we were going to start the show. And so...
Actually, you were here 45 minutes earlier than I was able to be here, so in a sense, you just kind of jumped on it.
Right. In a sense, time doesn't really exist.
Not in riverwest. Not in Milwaukee. And apparently not in the James Bond franchise.
Or apparently all of a sudden time does exist. All of a sudden James Bond, who is like Doctor Who, he can just keep becoming another person. All of a sudden it's a problem. All of a sudden he's old. He's getting old. And that bothered me about this film.
I think both of these films, just to touch briefly on Argo, they're both two films looking back at a kind of legacy. Argo's looking back directly at like a legacy of America and a kind of maybe a mythic time. The old adage that the past is always better remembered than it was lived, perhaps, is something that Argo is kind of posits and throws out there. Definitely James Bond is a franchise, is an icon, and there's a lot of looking back or nods to the former might and pride of the British Empire, which is really, in a sense, Britain and America are almost inseparable as far as empires. They kind of do signal the last great or the latest of the great empires, and pre-China and pre-Asia's rise right now. So you look at that, and they're both kind of two films looking back. And there's a lot of nostalgia in this kind of thing, and a lot of kind of what do you call it, retro jingoism going on in a weird way.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, they both films, if you really look at them from sort of a progressive politics view, or from the perspective of human rights and the United States and I guess Britain's foreign policies, they both prop up this idea of sort of a glorious America, glorious England.
Status quo type of thing, like
maintaining the status quo that these are the greatest nations in the world, the greatest democracies, and that they can't possibly be doing anything bad in these other in their international intrigue, or in their their spies are obviously just working for the good of democracy
and the maintenance of order, which is really the old. I mean, if you go back to any empire, I mean, what empires bring, it's services. What they bring, they conquer people and they destroy cultures, but they ultimately bring order and sameness and normality. And so, to a certain extent, people.
Well, I would agree with sameness and order. I wouldn't agree that they necessarily bring services any more than they steal or take services. They leech off of other sources of.
Well, what I'm saying is what they do is they consolidate. And in that consolidation, there's a mass order, and in that order, there's a normalcy and a sameness, and people feel a security in that, whether it be good or bad for them. Sometimes it's a collective comfortable misery.
Right, or it's like most things, everything, life is messy, and there are good things mixed with bad things.
Right. Except that you get it on a.
But generally speaking, it's not a good thing.
Well, I wouldn't.
Colonialization of other nations.
I couldn't say. It depends what side of the whip you're on. If you're on.
Well, if there's a whip involved, it's usually not a good thing.
But he asks the person wielding it. It seems like something from time immemorial that people move to. They move to.
Well, I think the question more is maybe sometimes when you're on the other end of the whip, you still appreciate being colonized. There are people who appreciate being colonized in this world.
Right, and there are people who will say things like, well, we were colonized under the British, for example. You say like India or the Caribbean, but what did they give us? They gave us, they'll look back and they'll say such things as, well, they gave us manners, and they gave us the English language, they gave us order, they gave us a business.
Or they even brought us things like tea shops, or they brought us,
these are the trappings of empire,
So they brought us beautiful architecture, or they brought us, things, cultural enhancements, or what do you call it? Like mergings. I'm not coming up with the right word, but synthesizing cultures and creating kind of a new culture, like New Orleans. I mean, New Orleans is a great example, where you have this African. Mixed with Caribbean, mixed with Franco. So you have Franco, Afro, Caribbean, mixed with Native American, and you just get this really interesting
mélange.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Or mix in English.
Jambalaya.
Kind of a mocha swirl. But the thing is, what organization ultimately brings is to, like, warring tribes or warring districts, is it brings unification, unity, and it brings a certainty. And whether that certainty be bad or good, it brings a kind of level of certainty that wasn't there. And people, we're creatures, we always move towards organization. We are by our nature societal. So we move towards.
That's interesting, because entropy is exactly the opposite. That it's always a movement towards disorganization.
Well, that is a rule that is what eventually happens, because in the movement towards organization, you get critical masses that overwhelm the organization, and you get certain interests that take over that are not democratic, or that are kind of usurping that idea of organization, and they work against it in the end. And that often happens. So vampires do collapse, but then they collectivize again. Mm-hmm. But they tend throughout history to move towards these greater and larger organizations, and you can see that with everything.
That's interesting. You said empires, but it sounded like you said vampires, and in a funny way, empires are like vampires.
And they're also like umpires, with a different consonant.
Or just pyres.
Yeah, right.
Just big flaming, burning things. Well, What does any of this have to do with Skyfall?
I don't think it does. But the point of the matter is that what I found was really interesting about Skyfall is that you've got. I mean, there's a lot of things interesting about it, but what you're trying to do and what you mentioned, what you alluded to in the beginning, is that you have this James Bond, who is an icon of the post-Cold War. You know, in the early days.
Or no, of the Cold War.
Well, of the Cold War in a sense, right? But I mean, I'm thinking.
I mean, Ian Fleming would be at the very early end, right? Post World War II, sort of.
Right.
And then his books became movies. I don't know. Did they run out of Ian Fleming books at some point?
No, I don't remember, but I've never read them. I kind of watched them. But what I'm thinking though is that it becomes such a popularized icon in the early '60s and mid
into the '70s.
So you think of that as I think of that as post Cold War. So
you think the '60s is post Cold War?
Well, I'm thinking of it in terms of. I think
the Cold War.
I
would say '86 would be the defining date or the fall of the Soviet
No, you're
Union.
right. Actually, what I'm thinking of is Red Scare, and I'm thinking of Red Scare being that. So I'm actually confusing the two. But you're right. It actually is. It is mid Cold War when you think about it. You're right. I'm sorry. That's a absolute stupid mistake on my part. But what I think about it is that whole time of the wall, the whole time of the Soviet block and everything, versus the American, incursions into different places of the world.
And Europe, all European, but American especially.
But it's really a stalemate of what happens. And so what we're doing at that time is using these sexy icons to kind of justify prowess as an American or British entity, a unity of the kind of an allied, post-allied forces.
Yeah, and then you have this person he's a free agent. He's kind of what's the word they always use for rugged individual in a sense.
Right, absolutely.
But he's working for an organization. He's kind of like Dirty Harry, kind of like Bogart.
Well, he's apparatchik, really, in a sense. He's the most. I mean, he's as bad as anyone from the Soviet side, but it's showing that there's a technological warrior out there that is going to keep us safe, almost a superheroic, super agile exceptionalist.
Right.
Because that's what we all are.
And he brings that British sort of gentlemanly quality, that extra thing that is so British of being, punching someone out and then, buttoning your top button, readjusting your tie after you do it.
Right. It makes us so much better than the people we beat, the barbaric Germans or the barbaric Soviets or barbaric Asians or any of those early.
Well, the Germans, I would say, would probably be even more so in some ways, but
they're sinister. They're not elegant and warm and cuddly like.
Or they don't sip tea in the same way. They have a guttural language and they drink beer in a thuggish way.
Right.
Yeah.
So in a sense,
and Americans do too.
But we're talking about what is being manufactured here is an icon that's for our side versus their side and how we differentiate, even though it's complete nonsense.
And there's the element of virility, sexual prowess as well.
Right, all of that, and which is like symbolic of the empire, because we are a very sexy empire at the time,
Yeah. Or just like take for example a Roman statue of a warrior. James Bond is kind of like the modern statue of a Greek god or of a Roman god in a sense. He's
in a sense
he's the god of our empire, kind of the god icon of our empire, sort of.
So the collective forces of NATO and the Allied forces post-war are really the fourth Reich, if there ever was, but if they really are. So in a sense, we've got this great warrior and this Ubermensch, the Superman in the form of James Bond that we just we call him James Bond. We don't call him an Ubermensch, and he's doing this work. And so now we're in this post Cold War situation, and this is a dated thing. It sexually looks misogynistic. It sexually doesn't.
Right. Yeah. So we have to
integrate the franchise.
Now they're addressing misogyny. They're addressing homophobia.
Right.
They're addressing
ageism.
Ageism. Are they addressing it, or are they implementing it?
Well, no. They're actually. I think they're in this movie. They're in Skyfall. They're inadvertently condoning it, but what they're trying to do is literally look at the star, who is
Daniel, what's
Daniel Craig.
Daniel
They're
Craig,
looking at,
yeah.
Sorry, looking at Daniel Craig, and they're saying, "Look at Craig. He's getting older. We know you're going to notice that he's getting older, but isn't old cool? Isn't old great? You think you're so smart and young, but isn't old good? Old is good." And it's almost all those insecurities of Hollywood are being foisted. It's really interesting because they're being foisted onto this protagonist, and he really is an anthropomorphic projection of that's all movies are anyway, really, of our moment situation. So of the zeitgeist, and here he is sitting there, and he's got to field all that. He's got to feel. He's got to field. We all want to see him be sexually powerful. We want to see him dominate. We want to see him kill, but we must always have an apology for it or a reason for it. So every time he kills someone, they just killed someone else.
Well, also can I point out another before you go too far down that road? There's also the digital era that nowadays some of our heroes are techno nerds, and there's also this tug of war between intellectual prowess or the IT warrior versus the bricks and mortar warrior.
Right, and you make sure that you incorporate these people because these are 9/10 of the population or 99.9/10 of the population,
and they can wreak such havoc with just the click of by sitting in at a computer.
But you incorporate these symbolic figures, but you ultimately eclipse them with James Bond. James Bond kind of absorbs their platform and eclipses them in his being. So the IT tech at one point in the film is showing him something, and he's just de-encrypted this incredible
literally like a ball of yarn.
Yeah, an enemy virus in the computer.
Yeah.
But then it's in one fell swoop, it's James Bond who looks at the image and is able to detect something that he must go to and then find the key to that.
Right.
And this guy.
Yeah. Somehow James Bond is the one who figures it out. It doesn't make sense really.
He's savvy enough because he's an intuitive animal versus this hyper-cerebral wimpy animal. But at the same time, you look at the wimpy animal is then blamed for downloading the virus to begin with. So he's this technocrat who is basically undoes himself. And it takes the primitive man, James Bond, to come back and rescue us all from our own smarty pants. Faggy little guy that's ruling us. We must have a virile macho guy to come by, who's not afraid of anything.
Yeah, we need to reassure the status quo that it's still important to be virile and macho, or that being virile and macho can still work in the
modern context.
In the modern context, or you could even say. The modern, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's that the audiences out there still want a James Bond to fantasize about. They don't want to have to fantasize about
a computer nerd.
Yeah, as computer nerds.
That's exactly what it is. It's all projection, and
heroes.
That's all projection. It's all constructed for our consumption,
Yeah.
And they're trying to plug every little
and they're not necessarily succeeding. But there's one of the great moments in the film is, and I think this was a successful thing, is when
he's confronted by
Xavier. What's it?
Xavier Bardem.
Xavier Bardem.
It's a kind of a bisexual, very gay entity.
Yeah,
he's gay villain.
He's certainly, there's something queer about him. Let's put it that way. He's queer in some way. He's an evil gay character. I don't think he's a good portrayal of a gay character at all. But
I think he's a great portrayal of gay character. But he's not of homosexuality.
But it's not an uplifting image.
No.
It's sort of like he's partly evil and twisted because he's gay.
Right, but
that's why I wasn't as taken by his character as you.
But in the post quote unquote post-racial, post-metrosexual era, that why can't a gay villain be gay and be that part of his persona and signature? Why do we have to apologize and make it an uplifting portrayal?
No, that's a good point. I just think that partly, I don't know Xavier. Is his name Xavier? Javier Bardem. I don't know his, sexual orientation. He's done other films where he's portrayed a sort of quasi-gay personality, but he just the extremity of it. The dyed hair, he has this sort of dyed blonde hair. It's sort of off-putting. It's not attractive really, and his eyebrows are also dyed, and then he's. And then he's twisted. He's a twisted person, and then it's like, well, he's also sexually twisted, And it's sort of like, yeah, when you're sexually twisted, you're more likely to be a twisted person. That's what the sense I get from that. It's in these, in a cartoonish movie like 007 movies. That's the sense I get. Is like it's cartoonish. It's typical. It's what you expect.
Well, it's writ large. It's writ large. It's fantasy, and it's got foes, and they've got extreme characters. I mean, they're caricatures, But I think the reason that you take issue with it in this movie is the weird kind of like all this work being done on the protagonist end of Bond to try to like fit him into a more socially acceptable post-stereotypical era, and in the meantime you're playing him against these like very classic Queenie stereotypes. But I still think Bardem, I think if everyone's
I appreciated it in certain ways, but I felt like there was something lacking, or it fell short of what it could have been.
It's confused. It's confused because you're playing two sides of the coin, and you kind of. I mean, I think it's actually I think it's crafty. People would argue that that's kind of crafty. You're like actually giving people permission with a more humanized Bond to then accept those other caricatures. Because you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. Okay, but you go in for the whole pound because Bond is, interestingly enough, more humanized and more modern. So then you kind of give permission for guys like Bardem and the femme fatales that are surrounding Bond, some of these femme fatales, and to be who they are.
Actually, to be honest with you, just like as you're talking, I wasn't so impressed with the casting. I didn't think that leading lady, what's her name?
Judi Dench?
No, I like Judi Dench. I think she's good. She's well cast. No, the black woman who was sort of his side. She was a Moneypenny. Well, no, she's not Moneypenny. She's kind of like another agent.
No, she is.
Moneypenny was always this woman in the office who Bond would like. There was always this sexual interplay between him, but she was just a secretary.
No, but she becomes the new Miss Moneypenny.
Moneypenny never did anything in the previous Bond movies.
But she was possibly his lover, and the fact that she's black and she's like part of the British the colonial diaspora that's coming back to Britain is also another kind of PC up.
But again, I felt like it fell short. She wasn't different enough. She just seemed sort of. She seemed very ordinary.
Yeah.
She seemed very ordinary. I didn't understand her casting.
Well, the point is, she's British. She's drab. Miss Moneypenny, if you look back at the old Bond things, is rather drab and kind of home officey too. So she's just a slightly a mocha swirl, if you will, of the Home Office. Again,
yeah.
She's just like the Obama kind of very not too black, not too white, and very acceptable and sexy. And why can't James Bond's possible legitimate significant other be this kind of Creole girl? You know,
right?
Woman.
But getting the point I was going to make, or the thing I was going to point out, was that there's this point where Bardem makes a sexual or he makes some sort of allusion that, you know, maybe I'm gonna rape you sexually or do something sexually
James
to
Bond,
you.
right? And he said, if you're trying to think about your training now, your training prepared you for this, and he goes, but this will be a first time for you.
Yeah.
And then to which Bond responds, what makes you think this is my first time?
Yeah.
So basically saying that, you know, I'm down with being gay if that's what it takes. You know, it's
right.
He doesn't. I don't have an issue here.
Yeah.
To then which Bardem scoffs, and it's
a good moment because what it does is it all of a sudden it's like you assume it kind of reframes the character that you would have thought never would have done any. You know, he's extremely heterosexual.
Yeah.
You know, James Bond. Yeah. That means that, you know, maybe Sean Connery was having. You know, it's like because James Bond's lived for so long. I mean,
but come on,
in the movies,
he is British, so anything's possible.
Right. He went to an all-boys school, obviously. Well, no, isn't he Scottish? It turns out he's Scottish.
Right?
Yeah.
He's a good.
It's even more chance.
Which is interesting. Now, that's another thing in the film that I thought really interesting is like. As you're looking back, you're trying to make this work, you know, and at the end you have to have within the film you have to have a big conflagration. And so at a certain point you've got they're pimping a lot, they're making a lot of nods to the old Bond franchise. There's they're making fun of gadgetry because computers have overtaken all gadgetry. So he has a tiny little radio that looks like a ridiculous prop.
Yeah, like a little Max Smart thing.
Yeah, but it does kind of work, and it's a nod to the old gadgetry of the past. And then they take out James Bond's old car, his old whatever that was, the MG or something.
And this is the part where it started, for me, it started to not, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about worked against the film for me.
Well, because it's real self-referential, but it's also kind of like what it's grasping for at that point when they're trying to constantly fit the new make a new Bond out of the old icon, and they start going for the old fetishistic accoutrements. So they're like bowing to all these little conventions. See, it is a Bond movie. It is a Bond movie. And then in the end, they do the most, to me, like overt Slavish thing. They go back. They establish a backstory of James Bond emanating from Scotland, which is really in a sense the analog to America's South, if you look at Britain, because it's where the good old boys are of England. You know, it's the actual guys who did a lot of the dirty work for the British Empire against the Irish and the rest. But they were also these kind of thought of roughnecks and goofballs, and so but nevertheless, very noble, full of honor. You think of all the Mel Gibson kilt movies and things like that. So these guys they go back to Scotland to have the final battle in Scotland. Like, where is the real Britain now? The real Britain is, it's back where the most unintegrated part of Britain is. You know, it's Scotland. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where there's a purity there, and there's an old abandoned house, incidentally enough, an old mansion that Bond used to live in, but the caretaker is still there, even though they've sold out all the armaments. Again, a reference to demilitarization and lack of military might, but we still have this trusty old gun, this trusty old house, a trusty old caretaker, and our Scottish fuck you ingenuity, that's going to get us in. Don't come to putting it to Scotland, lads. You know what I mean? We'll give you a hi ho and heave. And so they. And in the end, have this queer like traitor from the diaspora come back, basically an outsider, and ultimately it's a xenophobic kind of like slingshot backwards, like into time. It was like he even says we have to go backwards in time where we have power, and then he takes M with him to Scotland and has the whole fight come home, to them where they can have their land. It's really an interesting. Post-colonial commentary in a weird way. It's like we'll have to find our identity within ourselves on our original landmass, even though there's no such thing. Because all these were like warring tribes that were conquered. Well, let's go back to where our original victories were. Over each other in a sense. And then it brings back the biggest theme I think in the movie that I think that when M is kind of speaking of who are our enemies now. Our enemies, we don't know. They're in the shadows.
Right.
We don't know who they are. They used to be on different.
This is a new, it's a new era, and again, here I had problems with it and we talked about this last night, where I felt that, what is she talking about? We live in a time where we've never had such high levels of over security. Britain is known for having a camera on every corner now. But in the movie, they kind of make this false assumption, or they make this false pretense that somehow in the modern day in Parliament in England, and you could kind of assume the same thing about America, because like you say, they're sort of parallel empires in a sense, that now that the Cold War is over, we don't have any reason to fight anymore. Why should we be doing, we should just be pulling back all our security. It gives the implication that that's what's happening. That's the current reality, the tableau that we're working off of. Where actually it's exactly the opposite. No, we've heightened security. We've created this idea of terrorists that don't even exist, and we're getting rid of all our civil liberties now because of these imaginary terrorists.
Right.
And it's because of, you could do a whole show about why that is, but that's not the situation. The situation is we're not living in a reality where, because the Cold War is over, now we don't have to have the CIA and we don't have to have black ops. It's the exact opposite. We've tripled. We've expanded that. exponentially. It's gotten so much huger.
And because these quote unquote enemies are in the quote unquote shadows, what we're doing is spying on ourselves and our own people.
Right.
And this is and like they say every.
And it's Orwell. It's Orwell.
It's Orwell.
It's not just Orwellian. It's literally what Orwell.
And that's why you've got to
predict it.
And that's why you have to bring in these old symbols of the good fight to justify the new fight.
To justify this. And that's where the propaganda of this film becomes a little bit disconcerting. Right. I mean, it's one of the places.
Every war film, they say, is actually an endorsement of war because of the action and the adrenaline.
Yeah.
Different.
Unless it's a really negative war film. Unless it shows the horror of war.
Even a negative war film, they would say there's always some kind of championing going on. Yeah. But in this situation, in a Bond film, it's an absolute endorsement of the state.
Yeah.
And
it's what it says is we need to heighten our security.
Yeah.
We need to bring it up a bit because there's all this stuff going on in the shadows, as if people don't already say that every day.
Right.
Oh no, you don't realize we really need to heighten it. It's like,
well, it was the irony and
the most dangerous thing is this. This is the danger.
Yeah, this is the danger.
This is what we need to worry about. This mentality, this idea that we live in that there's all this
a perpetual state of war and fear. And that's what she says. An interesting quote. She says, our enemies are in the shadows, and I can only think that my immediately leaps to Jung and Carl Jung and the shadow. Our own shadow.
Right.
Every hero is the villain. Every villain has a shadow that is a hero. And here, these state people are the terrorists. They're talking about the shadows, and you kind of think that if the writers at least had some idea of the irony here, of what they were saying when they were saying it. But now that this kind of is a brings us to Argo in a sense, around a way, because here's a film now that actually does literally have to go back in order to find a warmer, gentler time, in order to tell a story about America being a good leader or heroic government, a responsible government.
Yeah.
And in this movie, of course, Ben Affleck is the CIA operative who is going to make a fake movie in order to free the hostages on the eve of the Khomeini rule and the end of the Shah's reign in the 70s, the son of the Shah's reign, the Shah right around the deposed Shah that America returned to Iran to great folly, and he ended up being a human rights violator, a lot of torture, a very hated person, and
also it heralded the beginning of a new era. Islam, but also just a new era worldwide, especially in places like Africa and Latin America and Iran and places like that, the third world, where we started to depose dictators. I mean, we were doing it before, but this was the first time that we did it. We were doing it before, but this was the first time that I think that we did it in the way that we did.
It was so well recorded. It was so well recorded with media and so well reported. It came on the heels of Vietnam, and so there was a lot of people, a large voice of critique being fielded in and outside of America, and not just in the Middle East for what we had done. And so what's interesting about this movie is that it's bookended. It's bookended at the beginning with a kind of apologetics that says, well, we really did do this at this time.
Right. It admits a little bit.
It admits a little bit. And then at the end, it kind of admits a little bit. But in the middle, then it says, by putting these two bookends of apology, we can play out this a melodrama of Americans and their great heroic efforts. One American, of course, again, the agent of the state, going to rescue a bunch of innocent Americans who are also like apparatus, but they work for the embassy, whatever.
Right.
But
they're sort of bureaucrats.
They're sort of bureaucrats, and so we're rescuing civility from, again, savagery.
Right. Right.
And it's American civility. Now, to me, I liken this. I saw this in Seattle, and I said, this movie is like. Is if the story of Christ was told by the guys who, the crazy hijinks that took place in the manufacture and sale of the cross, at the last minute, like from the cross merchant's perspective, and like what they went through to get that show on the road, you know what I mean? As opposed to the tale of or whatever, or you believe it or not, but the myth of Christ. I mean, it was like a bizarre, like hyper narcissistic detail in the midst of something that was so much more important, which was the Middle East, post. I'm thinking of our Egyptian pan-Islamic, pan-Arabic guy Nasser, a post-Nasser. Kind of finding of themselves, a post-war, post-Nasser Middle East trying to find itself, heroically kind of throwing off the shackles of Western imperialism and trying to get back to their own kind of self-determination. That's the real story, I would think.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at this thing outside of an American perspective or from a humanist perspective.
Yeah.
But what we focused on is this tiny little melodrama, and there's a lot of nostalgia around it. There's a lot of nostalgia.
See, now I guess I see the nostalgia that a little bit, and there was some effectiveness.
Star Wars figures.
Yes, and the Planet of the Apes, and the kids, the way the kid is dressed in, like the period costumes and so on. But I mean, that's kind of, I don't know. I didn't see it as a very nostalgic film as much as it was something where it was very much of a Hollywood film, where a bunch of Hollywood people. I can see this happening. This happens all the time. In fact, I heard that every time This American Life tells a really interesting, comes across an interesting story, and this would be kind of like a This American Life type of story where, did you know that at a certain time the CIA pretended to make a movie in Iran in order to get some of the people out of some of the embassy people out of
crazy. That's
it's just like tell me that story.
Even though I don't know what the history is around it.
But this is something that I heard that every time that happens, every time there's like an intriguing story on This American Life, it gets optioned by someone in Hollywood.
Right.
They option it.
Right.
They're always optioning those stories. And this is just a typical type of thing where it's like a thing of our era. Normally it would probably have been a documentary.
Right.
And it's just kind of like quirky and like a cool story. But you're right that it ignores the reality behind it, that we are, it's fine, it's a quirky, cool story, but let's talk about the big story. What's the big picture? Who's talking about that? And then there's another whole aspect to this that doesn't get touched upon, and you can't expect a movie to. I mean, they are protected in the sense that it's like, well, you can't expect them to have to give you the entire story of the Shah and the way when the CIA went in there and performed a coup d'état and basically did something outrageous and completely undemocratic and very imperialistic,
anti-American
against the American people. I think the American people would not have stood for what the operations that we were doing there. But the another story that doesn't get talked about, which is equally ridiculous, is the whole arms for hostages deal that went on in order to get Reagan in office.
Right.
That we were giving Iran arms. Oh no! What were we doing again?
Iran-Contra style.
The Iran-Contra that we were using. Yeah, Oliver North, and that we were
we're exchanging drugs.
That we were exchanging.
We were exchanging arms and drugs.
In order to pay the hostage keepers to hold the hostages past the election in order to defeat Jimmy Carter.
Right.
That is such a
amazing tale of hubris.
Yeah, an amazing tale of just.
I think it is recorded, but it's
fuckery.
Yeah, it's high fuckery, right?
Yeah.
But then you'll go to some like heartwarming story of the guys at Smith and Wesson and getting over cancer just in time to deliver a great package.
Yeah.
And the coke. So
I disagree with the analogy of the cross and the Smith and Wesson in the sense that these people, yes, they were operatives. But the thing is, had they stayed there, they probably would have just been thrown in the same
annihilated.
Well, they might not have been killed. They might have been just thrown in, put in, joined with the other hostages. They may have been killed. They may have been tortured. They probably would have been tortured and so on. But they wouldn't have. It's not as if those people were on their way to do something malicious, or any more malicious than just simply issuing passports to people who probably shouldn't have.
We don't know that, but the point
you know,
the point of the matter is we probably issued passports to people who were helping us in the Shaw
right,
area.
exactly.
It's
I mean, they
Vietnam.
were operatives in the big picture.
They're an unfortunate collateral damage of imperialism. So, you know, really, if we could use that term for them, they would have been the collateral damage of our adventurism in the Middle East at that point. And we were able to not leave them, which was really good for them and really good for, you know, their families. It's nice not to die. It's nice not to have people murdered stupidly and in a mob, you know. But I still think this is a footnote, you know, this masquerading as a giant leap for mankind. And I think it's really kind of tragic that our story